May 1945, North Sea, fog. The water lies flat like hammered steel, disturbed only by the slow slap of waves against concrete harbor walls. Somewhere in the distance, a truck engine grinds, boots thump along a pier, voices echo, muffled by fog. Then it comes, a thin metallic whistle rising into a deep, groaning vibration. Dark shapes drift through the mist. Long, narrow hulls, grey, scarred, unmistakable German U-boats, once hunters of the open ocean, now silent giants waiting for their fate. A valve opens, then another, then a third. Seawater explodes into ballast tanks, rushing down narrow metal shafts, flooding battery rooms like a cold, rising breath. The submarine tilts, steel trembles. A final rush of air spits from the conning tower hatch, as if the boat itself exhales. On the pier, the crew stands motionless. No salutes, no cheers. Just men watching the symbol of their service sink beneath the water that once carried them to war. One of the Kriegsmarine's deadliest weapons disappears beneath the waves, swallowed by its own crew. Why did German U-boat captains choose to destroy their boats? Was it defiance? Despair? Duty? Or something far more calculated? A final act no one ever dared to admit publicly? By the spring of 1945, Germany was collapsing on every front. Cities burned, armies disintegrated. The Kriegsmarine, once feared for its grey wolves, had become a fractured, dying force. But in the chaos, one weapon remained deeply feared by the Allies: the U-boat fleet. Not just the aging Type 7 or 9 boats, but the revolutionary new Type 21 Elektrobooter, submarines years ahead of Allied technology. Faster underwater than on the surface, nearly silent, capable of altering the war at sea if deployed earlier. The Allies knew this. Germany knew that the Allies knew, and as defeat loomed, a critical question emerged. What would happen to the U-boats? Britain demanded unconditional surrender. The United States wanted the technology, and the Soviet Union wanted complete boats, hulls, engines, guidance systems, everything. Inside Admiral Dönitz's headquarters, another thought took shape. If Germany was finished, then at least its most advanced machinery should not be handed to its enemies. But there was more. A nearly century-old naval principle whispered through the ranks. No German warship should fall into enemy hands intact. It wasn't a written law, it was tradition. Pride hardened into instinct. As the war's end approached, a new order circulated, vague but understood by every captain. If surrender becomes inevitable, the U-boats are not to be captured. They are to disappear, and so began the final, haunting chapter of the U-boat arm. A fleet not defeated, but drowned by its own sailors. To understand why U-boat crews scuttled their vessels, you first need to understand what a U-boat was in 1945. It wasn't a ship, it was a world unto itself. A cramped metal tube filled with diesel fumes, sweat, stale air, and humming machinery. 40 to 50 men sharing bunks, food, fear, and the thin metal skin that separated them from the crushing pressure outside. A U-boat was more than a weapon. It was a fragile, living ecosystem built on trust and routine. The mechanics of scuttling were brutally simple. Valves opened, flood ports released, ballast tanks filled, batteries drowned. The ocean did the rest. Every submarine was built to sink, quickly, decisively, normally to evade attack, but in 1945, for something else. Above all stood tradition. German naval officers were raised with the expectation that no vessel worthy of the flag should be surrendered intact. This belief, forged in imperial times, ran deeper than politics or propaganda. Dönitz's Regenbogenbefehl, the Rainbow Order, was the manifestation of this mentality. The wording was intentionally vague. No U-boat is to fall into enemy hands in operational condition. To some commanders, this meant sink the boat. To others, destroy sensitive equipment. To a few, ignore the order entirely. The psychological divide was immense. Some captains wanted to preserve their men's lives and surrender peacefully. Others felt bound by pride, unwilling to let the Allies claim the Navy's most advanced creation. And a few, hollowed by years at war, saw scuttling as the last act of control left to them. On the eve of surrender, hundreds of U-boat commanders faced a decision no one could give them guidance on. Do you hand over the machine your men fought and died in? Or do you sink it yourself? Hamburg, a silent farewell. May 2nd. U-534 rests at its berth. The crew gathers on deck, saying little. A nod here, a hand on steel there. They know what must happen. Valves spin open. Water thunders in. The hull settles, groaning like an old war horse kneeling for the last time. Men stand on the pier and watch it disappear. No music, no orders, just the slow burial of a machine that carried them across the world. Flensburg, a message no one wanted. A radio man brings a message. Rainbow, execute. The commander stares at the words. He knows the war is effectively over. He also knows the meaning behind the phrase. His crew looks to him, some desperate to live, others proud, others numb. He finally says, "We do it quietly." The boat sinks. Keel, the ones who refused. Not all captains followed the order. Some raised white flags. Some surrendered their boats intact. Some saved dozens of lives simply by choosing not to sink. For that, they were criticized by peers and praised by historians. Choosing to obey a vague tradition is easy. Choosing to disobey it can require far more courage. Norway, the last voyage. Deep in Norwegian fjords, several boats set out one final time, not for battle, but for depth. Crews boarded rubber rafts. They paddled away in silence. Behind them, their submarines tipped forward, sank stern first, and vanished, like heavy beasts finally lying down. A German radio man later wrote, "It looked like the ocean was reclaiming its own." When Allied forces seized the ports, they were stunned. Harbors were full of U-boats, but almost none intact. Grey hulls stuck out of shallow water. Others lay half submerged. Some were gone entirely. The race to capture German technology, hull shapes, torpedoes, sonar, batteries, was largely lost before it began. The sea had swallowed most of what the Allies came to take. In the years after the war, Allied intelligence teams, divers, and historians catalogued the scuttled fleet. Many U-boats lay surprisingly intact on the seabed. Others had broken apart under pressure or storms. Inside them, investigators found glimpses of brilliance, battery systems unheard of in the West, streamlined hulls decades ahead of their timed torpedo technology that influenced navies for generations. But most secrets lay too deep, too damaged, or too remote to be recovered. The scuttling became a topic of fierce debate. Was it military logic? A final act of defiance? A symbolic surrender, not to an enemy, but to inevitability? Historians today agree. It was all of these things. A strategic move to deny the Allies vital technology. A psychological decision rooted in naval tradition, and a deeply human reaction to defeat. For some crews, it was a burial. For others, a last mission they felt obligated to complete. For many, it was simply the only decision that made sense in a world that had collapsed around them. Most of the U-boats remain underwater, cold, silent, untouchable. They are relics of an era where technology, pride, desperation, and myth intertwined and disappeared into the deep. Deep beneath the North Sea, dark forms lie scattered across the sand. Salt water eats through their steel. Fish drift through corridors once filled with voices, alarms, and breath. No engines, no orders, no war. Only the quiet memory of machines that once shook the Atlantic. Sometimes a single air bubble rises toward the surface, a soft reminder from a hull that hasn't spoken in decades. To some, they are wrecks. To others, they are monuments,